Welcome, everybody. It's so great to see this full house here to learn about Ichabod Pease. Ichabod Pease lived an amazing and inspiring life on his own, but he's also a lens through which we can learn about and understand slavery in New London and in Connecticut. So I hope that you enjoy this program. Before we start, I want to say a few things. I want to thank Ranjit, and I want to thank Deacon Ellen for making this space available and being so accommodating. This is the perfect space in which to hold this program, as you will hear later. I also want to thank our two speakers who put this together as a labor of love. Mary Lycan, she's a student at UConn. She went there undergrad. She's been studying as a graduate student. She's been focusing on late 1700s and early 1800s American history. And I want to also thank Tom Shook, who is a native New Londoner with a passion for uncovering New London's hidden, obscured, forgotten, or suppressed histories. And I also want to remind everybody, well, first I want to thank you all because I saw so many of you donating to the restoration of Mr. Pease's tombstone. If we get more than we need, we're going to either, if it's a small amount more than what we need, we're going to set that aside for annual care of his tombstone. But if it's enough, we're going to use it to restore the tombstone of his wife, who is buried next to him. That said, I'm going to let Mary Lycan begin the presentation. Thank you, everybody.
Good evening. I would like to thank Jan Dargell, one of the St. James historians, who has kept the memory of Ichabod Pease alive in this parish. I'm retired and she's not, so I'm the one who has time to nose around in the archives. But I never would have discovered Ichabod Pease by myself. I would also like to thank Fiddleheads for their sponsorship of this program. In this slide, looking down Broad Street toward the courthouse, you can see what's probably on the left a corner of Jedediah Huntington's Mount Vernon house, where Ichabod Pease was employed as a gardener during his freedom years. That's about where Fiddleheads is right now. Thank you, Fiddleheads. This is the teaser. This is my 15 to 20 minute presentation, and I'm going to spend all semester finding out more. So ask me back in January. Just about everything I study in history turns out to be more complicated than I thought it would be. New London looks so serene and rustic in this image. Now I know it's quiet because the British blockade of the War of 1812 has shut down the harbor, and everybody who can has fled to Norwich. When I started studying slavery in 2012, I had a hard time getting my head around all the ways in which slaveholders thought about and used slaves. Enslaved people were property, valuable, income-producing assets, like a farmer's horses or a fisherman's boat. Masters could sell slaves, rent them out, or use them as collateral for a loan. You could give away slaves as presents. You could even insure them the way we insure our cars. In colonial times, and for long after, our society had a clear pecking order. White men were at the top, black slaves were at the bottom of the heap, and it was a deep heap. There were no trade schools, so white parents paid a fee to bind out boys and a few girls around age 12 as craft apprentices. Other children were desperately poor or orphaned or had parents the town fathers judged were not bringing them up to be productive members of society. Alert, this part's going to be important for later. The town fathers had the power to bind these white and black free children out as pauper apprentices, some as young as toddlers. They were placed in respectable families to learn to obey and work hard until they were adults. They were also unpaid, and their labor paid for their raising. There were no requirements to teach them a craft or anything but the basics of farming for boys and housekeeping for girls. A lot of boys chopped kindling and shoveled manure. A lot of girls scrubbed floors and wiped little noses and little bottoms for years. This hierarchy was enforced by legally and socially sanctioned violence. James Mumford, the son of Venture Smith's second owner, George Mumford, tormented his father's slave with no consequences at all. Not surprisingly, some craft apprentices, like Benjamin Franklin, some pauper apprentices, and some slaves ran away. Thanks to this funeral sermon, we know more about Ichabod Pease than we do about 99% of enslaved African Americans. When Hallam came to be rector of St. James at age 28, Ichabod Pease was 80 years old. For 6 years, they enjoyed the closest thing to friendship there could be between a young white man and an old black one. Ichabod lived just behind the church, attended every service, and served at the altar. Robert listened to his life story, and after Ichabod's death, he wrote an outline of it down and published it. It is a wonderful entry point for learning more about the life of Ichabod Pease. Hallam wrote, Ichabod Pease was born 10th September 1755 on Fisher's Island in the family of James Mumford, who was the owner of his parents. He was given by Mr. Mumford to his son Robinson and grew up in the family. This chart shows how the story of Ichabod Pease follows that of Venture Smith, a generation older than Ichabod Pease, who was sold away from the family in 1754. And this is partly to help you distinguish between two different people who were named Robinson Mumford. George Mumford leased the Fisher's Island land, building, cows, and sheep from the Winthrop family. They used it as a provisioning farm for trade to the Caribbean sugar islands. The West Indian planters made so much money from sugar that they grew it on every bit of land. They could make more money by importing food crops, meat, wool, horses, and timber from the mainland. Slavery was notoriously brutal on the islands. The average life expectancy of a newly arrived African slave was 5 years. Ichabod Pease would have moved with the Mumfords to New London as an infant in 1755 or 1756. I'm guessing here that he was given to Robinson Mumford and Sarah Coit as a wedding present in 1761. Slaves were often given as wedding presents, and young child slaves, both male and female, who were too young to do heavy or skilled work, often picked up sticks in yards, tended babies and littler children, and did other light work around the house. Sarah was a pious Congregationalist and wanted to make sure that Ichabod could read the Bible, so she taught him to read. Learning the trade of shoemaking would have made Ichabod a more valuable slave. He could supply the growing Mumford family with shoes, make shoes for his master to sell, or be rented out for his skilled labor. According to Hallam, Mr. Mumford espoused the royal cause. Loyalists were subject to having their property seized and being jailed or run out of town. New London, the hotbed of patriot privateering, might have become a very uncomfortable place for Robinson Mumford. On his reconnaissance trip to North Carolina, he saw land that he liked at the present-day site of Fayetteville in Cumberland County. Ichabod Pease accompanied him as his attendant. Hallam reported of Pease, the sight he had of Southern slavery had produced no liking for it. In March of 1779, Robinson Mumford sold up 17 parcels of real estate, including his merchant business premises and his home and farm of 200 acres. He vanished from the New London tax lists. He really had sold everything he owned. Pending settling all his affairs, he was a man on his way out of town. Remember those pauper apprentices I told you about? On September 20th, 1779, Robinson Mumford signed pauper indentures to become the master of 3 free black toddlers until the girls turned 18 and the boy turned 21. Then he left town and moved to North Carolina. He turns up in various deeds and commercial transactions beginning in the spring of 1780. He became a tobacco merchant and bought thousands of acres of land. The U.S. Census of 1790 lists Robinson Mumford as having no free black people at all in his household and 6 slaves. What do we think happened to those little children? In my archival experience, the more dubious the transaction, the more it's dressed up in the signatures on the document. This one, Caesar's indenture to Mumford, just like the other 2, is loaded with signatures and seals. One thing that puzzles historians about the era before the telegraph or the telephone is how quickly information spread and crowds gathered. One thing we do know is that slaves always knew more about their masters than the masters knew about their slaves. Ichabod probably had friends in every slaveholding house in New London. He had reason not to trust Mumford's promise to free him once he was in North Carolina again. And he escapes. And is driven right back to New London. Likely some of the sailors who hid Pease on board were also black, enslaved or free. Many of New London's black men were mariners. And he's betrayed. Ichabod goes underground and supports himself by making shoes. That is a skill which is highly compatible with hiding in a series of friendly households, making shoes for the family to earn his keep. And Ichabod is re-enslaved, this time to a different master. Remember, he was valuable property. Apparently, Robinson Mumford had left town owing money to John Deshawn. Deshawn sued for debt, secured a judgment, and had it executed against the property Mumford had left behind in New London, Ichabod Pease. After some years, Deshawn emancipated Pease shortly before his own death. Soon after Seabury's arrival at St. James in 1785, Ichabod Pease became a communicant. Since Seabury stayed until 1795, he was in office at the time of Pease's emancipation, and so presumably knew him as a free man. As of the 1790 census, Samuel Seabury himself owned 3 slaves. Now I know who ironed those billowy surplices we see in his portraits. As a free man, Ichabod Pease worked as a gardener for Jedediah Huntington and several successive owners of the Mount Vernon house for as long as he was physically able. He was also a leader of the black community and acted as executor of the estates of several of his friends. Here is another peaceful view of New London during Pease's freedom years. It does not show the furor over abolition that was raging through the town, nor Ichabod's little school for black children. At age 1, he had kept school in his own house. After Ichabod Pease's death in 1842, we can see from his estate inventory that he was a natty dresser with a 3-piece black suit and several overcoats. He could apparently turn his hand to just about any trade. He owned barber and carpenter tools in addition to his gardening tools. He owned a Bible and 7 other books, which is more than many wealthy people left. For nearly the first half of his life, Ichabod Pease was property. But by the time of his death, he owned property, his house and lot opening on Church Street, worth $400. The descendants of his last master, said Hallam, followed him to the grave with unfeigned respect and sorrow. Ichabod Pease was truly a remarkable man. Let's clean up that gravestone. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary. This is going to take me a minute to switch to this other computer here.
No, the town fathers, it was kind of like with foster kids today.
Can you use a microphone? Can you use a microphone?
Okay,
Thank you.
It's kind of like foster care today. If somebody decides that the parents are unfit, or if then the town fathers just swoop in, but also some parents who were desperately poor also voluntarily gave their children into such arrangements. A few of these are quite benign. The Starr sisters in New London had a little girl. A little black girl as an apprentice, and her indenture is rather adorable. It says, "Oh, we're going to teach her knitting. Oh, we're going to teach her sewing. Oh, we'll teach her to read." And that's quite absent from the Mumford documents. There was a lot of latitude and not much supervision. Yes.
Somewhere early on, you said something about people going from New London scooting up to Norwich. Would you repeat what that was about? Because we live in Norwich.
Well, that was because during the British blockade of the War of 1812, people were afraid they were going to come in and do another Benedict Arnold on New London. So they loaded up and went right up what is now Route 32 to get away as fast as they could.
There's an additional piece of that. The British had blockaded New London Harbor. They were chasing Stephen Decatur, Commodore Stephen Decatur. He fled upriver and went to Startage Hill, or he went up there near Norwich to escape the British. Where Dow Chemical is. Thank you, Sally Ryan.
Did they have any children?
No, they never did. And I regret that. But, I wondered, whether he was, and I don't want to romanticize, I wonder if he was a grandpa figure, because all of those descendants of his last master adored him. And they were many, many years younger than he was, so you kind of wonder what was going on. But, no, they had no children. Yes?
Did he have any brothers or sisters?
I have absolutely no idea. I have an idea about his birth, but I am going to have to get into colonial census records, which I have not done at all. I've always been a stop at 1790 on the way back, but person, but I'm going to have to go further, so that'll be fun.
Thank you.
Yes?
On one of the slides you had mentioned that term slaves who were born after 1784 and two in the slave mother were freed at 25. Now, did they free them at 25, or were they still slaves but freed from that?
I'm going to touch on that when I talk.
Okay, they were freed at 25, but some people think that slavery in Connecticut was abolished in 1784. It wasn't. Not one single slave got freed until 1809, and still in 1848 there were a few old slaves left. And in 1848 when the state abolished slavery.
Excuse me. One of the reasons it was abolished was because if your slave reached old age, you were responsible for his or her care. So in the interim, they had the first Social Security.
Yeah. There were, once they realized that there is a retirement plan which was, oh, you're too old to work now, get lost, take care of yourself, then the legislation came in to try to work out those issues so that the old slaves wouldn't be exploited.
Okay, fasten your seatbelts. I'm Tom Shook. I am a New London native, as Laura said. I have an interest in this kind of history. I stumbled on this story, an unknown story of New London, because I have an interest in the Civil War, I have an interest in Lincoln, And I joined a New London Facebook page called New London History, Memories, and More. And there were a few people on there. There's a lot of nostalgia on there. There are several people who are very serious about uncovering unknown history. And one of them, at least one of them, is here tonight. Nicole Thomas is sitting right over there for the people who know, who recognize her from that picture. Okay. So I started looking into New London schools, and I came across a thing about Ichabod Pease. I'd never heard of Ichabod Pease. And I came across this in a book called The Historical Sketch of New London. And it says that blacks were, New London, in 1837, the New London School Society was vexed by the issue of black students and white students. And I thought, wow, what is that all about? I didn't know. And then it says, Ichabod Pease, an aged colored man, okay, so he stepped up and he was very well respected, okay? And he started a school in the shadow of the church. I thought, wow, what is this story? I've never heard of this. How come I've never heard of this? And I wonder where that school is. What can I find out about Ichabod Pease? What I found out, this is Ichabod Pease Emancipation Papers. Okay, if anybody is interested in doing a little spelunking, we call it, go down to the City Hall of New London. Okay, in the records vault, you can find slaves were considered property. Okay, so there are records of slave transactions in the property transactions. That's where I found this. That is his emancipation. If you read through it, what it says in regard to what you said there, in order to emancipate a slave, there are 3 conditions. He had to be at least 25 years old, less than 45 years old, he had to be in good health, and he had to want it. So if you read through that, it says all of those things. There are reasons for that. They didn't want people dumping aged slaves on the community. Okay, they wanted to take care of him. So they were certified that he met those conditions and he was free. That's his signature. Okay, we don't have a whole lot of it. We don't have any photographs because he was dead before they invented cameras. All right, but that I believe is his signature. Again, the records at City Hall. At his death, this is from the discourse. This is the discourse on Ichabod Pease. It's available on Amazon for about $8 if you're interested in reading it. Okay, Reverend Hallam, the rector of this church, said that eminent citizens wanted to be bearers at his funeral. I thought, wow, who was this guy? Everybody wants to be at his funeral. He was an emancipated slave. Why? There's the discourse. Okay. Well, it turns out this is what happened. In short, he was 81 years old, and he is an emancipated slave, and he started to run a school for black students out of his home on Church Street. How many 81-year-olds do you know that start running a school at age 81? I thought, wow, what is this story? Where's that church? All right. So I started looking on maps. I'm a map guy. I started looking down around where the church was. There are 3 St. James churches in the history of New London. The first one was on the Parade, okay, which was where Union School is, the Nathan Hale School. Okay, in 1781, Benedict Arnold came in, did a little redecorating down there, okay? So they needed to build a new church, okay? They built a new church where it says Universalist Church right there on the corner. It was originally the second St. James, okay? Then St. James built this church around 1850, and they sold the church to the Universalists. Okay, it said that he ran the school in the shadow of the church, if you read that sentence. So if you look at this church, sun comes up over there, okay? The shadow is going to be over there. His house isn't going to be on Church Street, so I'm on the wrong church. My friend Fuji, another New London history guy, said, you know, Tom, in 1837, this church wasn't built. It was that church. And if you look at this now, this faces east, okay? This, in the shadow of the church would be over here somewhere. So I looked through all those houses. I don't see anything for Ichabod Pease. Now this is the 1850 map. Of course, he's dead by that time. But you don't find any maps of New London identifying the houses this way before that. So I started looking through. Here's the 1854 map. Same picture, Universalist Church right there. No evidence of it. Then I went to the 1868 map. Look at that little arrow in the middle. Okay, suddenly that house there's a building there. Okay, that wasn't on the other maps. Okay, so I went down to what I should have done in the first place, which I went down to the City Hall records and did a title search on that property. Sure enough, Ichabod Pease bought that property in 1837, which is the year he started the school. Okay, and it says right in the title deed, in the title, it says that he has a 4-foot easement between his property, to get to his property, he's in a back lot, like a flag lot, to get access to his property. There's the 4-foot easement right there, okay? There's his house, right there. That's it. I thought, oh my God, I found it, okay? And then I looked at, I don't know if you've ever seen this map. This is one of my favorite maps in New London. 1876 map, it's an aerial bird's eye view of New London. Some fanatic drew every window in New London. Okay, you can zoom in on this. This is the whole city of New London. He drew it. You can see there's people on the street. There's people on the street. There's carriages. Okay, and look what's there. Here's the church. It's not a church now because this is 1876. It's a Universalist church. Okay, but there's the house right there, right in plain sight. That's where it was. By 1900. The Universalists, St. James had built this church, Universalists had built their own church, and that building was sold. It became a livery stable. This was the horse and carriage era. There were livery stables all over the place. It became the Avery Hack and Livery Stable. There it is right there. That was the church. This is a photograph taken about 1896, okay? You can see there's a steeple. You can just barely make it out above it. You can see that it was once a church. Now it's got big barn doors. There's a horse and carriage in front of it. And I was looking at this. This is a photograph provided by my friend Fuji, okay, who is a fanatic for that sort of stuff. And I looked a little closer at that picture. And look what I found. Okay, you see that arrow down there?
Yeah.
Okay, guess what that is? Okay, this may be the only photograph of Ichabod Pease's school. I am 99% sure. I did a title search. I traced it right up to 1900. Okay, and the chain of custody of that property. That's his house. And here's a map in this was 1896. This is going to be a fire insurance map from 1901, okay, taken from the same angle. You can see that's where the camera was. There's the church in the big building. It's a livery stable in 1901. And what's that building in the back? It's the only thing back there. That's Ichabod Pease's house. I thought, wow, okay. Where is it today? Okay, well, you can see we're here. We're right in that building there at St. James. And that church, let's see, okay, about 150 yards that way is where Ichabod Pease's school was. It's right where the Salvation Army, the Salvation Army headquarters is there. There's a parking lot adjacent to the former Stanton School, Stanton office building. It's in that parking lot, okay. I don't know that anybody knows this or anybody has discovered this. A couple of months ago, I took a group of kids from New London, their ethnic studies class up there. We did a Green Book tour of the sites in New London that are in Green Book. There's about 10 of them. And we happened to be going from a site over near Buckley School, going down to a site on Main Street. And as we walked down, I realized, oh my gosh, here's an opportunity to give kids a real taste of history. So I took a little side trip and we went to this thing. They didn't know this was coming. And I told them, this is the place where Ichabod Pease had his school. You are the only people in 180 years that knows that, okay? And that was, well, it was a very poignant moment because the kids realized suddenly history comes alive. They're not only studying history, they're making history. They're the first ones to stand on that site knowingly, okay, in 180 years. Okay, so I get excited about this stuff. This is the world of Ichabod Pease. Mary mentioned Robinson Mumford. This is where Robinson Mumford lived. This map, by the way, is down at City Hall. If you go into the foyer at City Hall, there's a huge map on the wall. It's supposed to depict New London in 1781. It was drawn in 1946, so it's a best approximation of what it was like. Okay, this is Main Street, now Eugene O'Neill Drive. This is where Robinson Mumford lived. She mentioned Captain Deshawn. This is where he lived. Okay, this is where the St. James Church was. Okay, in around 1837, this is where Ichabod Pease's school was. This is the world of Ichabod Pease in 1837. Okay, this is what we have now. This is why we're here tonight. One of the reasons why we're here tonight. This is Ichabod Pease's grave. You can't see, even looking at that, you can't see that they have his name spelled wrong on that gravestone. Okay, they spelled it P-E-A-S. He used both spellings, but he mainly used the P-E-A with an E on the end. We need to restore that stone. Okay, so why is this important? Okay, the life of Ichabod Pease tells an aspect of New London history that we have rarely, very rarely heard about, and that we've barely acknowledged. Okay, and this is only one story, by the way. You're going to hear some names tonight that those people deserve to have a story told about them too. We don't know their stories. There are many more. This is the way, the better that we can come to understand our past, the better able we are to understand our present, and the better we will be able to create our future. Okay, that's why that's important. All right, now we're ready to go. I'm going to talk about some obscure history. Okay, I'm just getting started. Trust me.
Right.
I'm not a gambling man, but I'm willing to make a wager tonight that everybody, including me, you're gonna find out some things that you didn't know about New London. Okay, and in fact, I'm willing to make that a wager that if anybody comes to me, in all honesty, and comes to me and says, you know, Tom, I didn't learn a doggone thing tonight that I didn't already know. Well then, if that person will come to me and tell me that and will make a donation to the gravestone, I will match their donation, whatever that is. Okay? I'm hoping this isn't too tough of a crowd here. Okay. First question is, or the first issue. You're all familiar with the American Constitution. The American Constitution announced that through the Declaration of Independence, they said all men are created equal. Well, we know there was some built-in hypocrisy for that, okay? Because it included, without naming slaves, they included slaves as part of the Constitution. And one of the ways they did that was they incorporated a Fugitive Slave Act, okay? The Fugitive Slave Clause was in the Constitution. The Fugitive Slave Act followed in 1793. Does anyone know when Connecticut entered into the first agreement of a Fugitive Slave Act? Anybody have a guess when that would have been? Connecticut had its own Fugitive Slave Act. Anybody try to make a guess?
If I remember serving correctly, they were one of the first.
Can you give me a year? Oh, I knew this was going to be tough. Go ahead.
I've gotten old.
Okay.
1800.
What's that?
1800.
No. The clauses already in the Constitution were 1787 and 1793. So it was already in effect by then. We're going back before that. Okay. I think I already won my bet here. But anyway, 1643. New London, Connecticut entered into a contract with the Confederation of New England States, and they had an agreement to return fugitives. At that time, it was mostly indentured servants. But there were slaves in New London at that time. In 1639, there were slaves in New London. Or in Connecticut, I should say. So in 1643, there was a Fugitive Slave Act in Connecticut. A lot of us like to think Connecticut is kind of an enlightened state. It's a blue state. We're progressive. Okay? But slavery was something that involved the entire country. And Connecticut was in from the very beginning. Now bear in mind, 1643, that's 3 years before New London was created. Okay. There was a Fugitive Slave Act in Connecticut 3 years before New London existed.
Wow.
Okay, that's how far back that goes. Okay. We like to think of Connecticut as a progressive place. What's his name? The abolitionist, Garrison, William Lloyd Garrison. He referred to Connecticut as the Georgia of New England. That was not a compliment. Connecticut was the last New England state to abolish slavery. Okay? Here's something else that I certainly didn't know. 1717, New London, they had a vote, and they objected to free blacks living in the town or owning land anywhere in the colony. I thought, wow, I never heard that. They took that to Hartford, and to the seat of government at that time, the colony, and in Hartford, they passed a prohibition. Okay, prohibiting free blacks and mulattoes from residing in any town in the colony, and it forbid them to buy land or go into business without the consent of the town.
What year was this?
1717.
Wow.
Okay? Now the thing, and not only that, it was retroactive, so they could invoke it at any time. The key to this is that it was selectively enforced. It didn't mean that they would force everybody out, but if you were a black or a mulatto person living here, your presence in Connecticut was very tentative, very tenuous, okay? If somebody decided they didn't like you, if they decided you were too much competition for them, they could file a complaint and the town could move against you and get you out of here. Okay, I certainly didn't know that.
That was the reason that came into being. There were some people in the area who were actually starting to become quite prosperous.
That's correct. And we're going to talk about a couple of those. Okay, in 1774, New London County was the greatest slaveholding section in New England. okay, with almost twice as many slaves as the most populous slave county in Massachusetts. I didn't know that. Okay. New London itself had 522 blacks and a population of 5,300. That's almost 10%. Okay, the average percentage in around New England was about 2 or 3%. New London was 10%, and those were slaves, by the way. Mostly, there were maybe a few free blacks. Okay, the town with the most in Connecticut was New London. The second was Stonington. Okay, the third was Groton. Then there were 2 towns from downstate, Stratford and something else. Then there was Norwich and Lyme. Those were the heaviest concentration of slaves in Connecticut. I don't remember being taught that in history class. Okay. Plantations. Plantations are a southern thing, right? Okay. That's what we like to think. That didn't happen up here. Well, there's a little town from here, 13 miles from here, called Salem, Connecticut. There was a man there named Samuel Brown. He was from Salem, Massachusetts. He owned 13,000 acres in Salem, and he had a plantation of 4,000 acres with 60 families enslaved. Okay, we're not sure exactly the number. It could be 60, it could be 100. Okay, frankly, that compares with anything down south. Okay, so once again, Connecticut is part of that. Mary mentioned the name Mumford. Okay. Very familiar name. We have Mumford Cove, we have Mumford Avenue. It's a very familiar name. They were shipping merchants. They were also slave traders. Okay, they did lease Fisher's Island from the Winthrops. You know what? You're probably familiar with the term overseer. Okay, an overseer on a plantation is a slave driver. Okay, Simon Legree being probably the most familiar one from Uncle Tom's Cabin. Okay, well, Samuel Brown had an overseer on that plantation in Salem. His name was Mumford. That was one of them. There were many. One of them was Mumford. And Mumford went on to own some very familiar names. The Mumford family owned Venture Smith. Mumford family owned Ichabod Pease, as Mary has already explained. Okay? Somehow I got her name as Anna. I get too many Sarahs and stuff, but this Sarah Coit Mumford was the wife of Robinson Mumford, and she had taken a liking to Ichabod, and she taught him to read. There are some significant women in his life. So it's not all bad. Okay, by the time of the American Revolution, Connecticut had more enslaved Africans than any other state in New England. Okay, then we come to the age of revolution. There were 4 revolutions I'm going to talk about briefly. Okay, the first, of course, is the American Revolution, with its built-in hypocrisy of all men are created equal. We know that's not true. There was the French Revolution. They said liberty, equality, and fraternity. This filters down, not only from the people who are fighting for that independence, but it also filters down to the man in the street and to the slaves. Okay? I mentioned already that this was part of the hypocrisy of the American Constitution, the Fugitive Slave Clauses. The word slavery is never mentioned in the Constitution. Political correctness at the time dictated that they call it a person held to service or labor. They didn't want to use that word slavery. Okay? Now, things were starting to change. In 1784, Connecticut passed the law of gradual abolition. What that meant was after 1784, people who were enslaved would be freed at age 25. The result of that is it took 3 generations for that to play out. Okay, slavery did not end in Connecticut until 1848. I think there were 6 slaves still in 1848 when they passed that. Okay, Connecticut again was the last state to. This little chart shows the numbers of slaves and the numbers of free blacks in Connecticut at the time. You can see in 1680 there were 30. There was a peak of 6,500. Okay, in 1774, and then the numbers start to decline. In 1790, suddenly we see 2,800 free blacks. Okay, they started to be emancipated, manumitted. There were free blacks moving from the south coming up. Okay, and the numbers then continue to decline on the left and increase on the right. It goes down to in 1840 there was 17, the 1840 census. There's some dispute about that as to whether it was 17. One group says that there's 54. And they couldn't explain why it went from 25 to 54. Well, the reason is down at the bottom of the page. Because in 1839, the Amistad came into New London. Okay, and there were 30-some slaves on it. That's why it was inflated to that. Of course, they were eventually freed. or they were returned to Africa, the ones who were left. Okay, and this was the discussion about that. Okay, another revolution that's very important is the Haitian Revolution. Probably the most, what's the word? People don't talk about the Haitian Revolution. One of the most important revolutions in the history of the world. Okay, it's the first and the only successful slave revolution in the history of the world that resulted in the establishment of a nation state. And the world has never forgiven Haiti for that. Okay, they still suffer from that. Okay, what did they do to get that? They were led by this guy, Toussaint Louverture. Okay, they threw out the French, the English, the Spanish, and then they threw the French out again. When they threw the French out the last time, that's the guy they threw out. You might recognize his name. Okay? He had a lot of success in other parts of the world. He was not successful here. He needed money. So he settled for money, and they bought their way out. During that Haitian Revolution, people fled Haiti. The slave owners took their slaves. They fled to Cuba. They fled to the nearest place that would allow slavery. One of the biggest places was the next French colony, nearest French colony, which was Louisiana. Okay? There is still a huge Haitian population and culture in Haiti. We were in New Orleans a couple of years ago, and we took a cab, and our cab driver was Haitian, and he was getting ready to go back and visit his family in Haiti. Okay. New London has a connection to this, but this is another little bit of New London history that you may not know. In 1794, which is a good year, Captain Samuel Hurlbut brought a church bell from a convent in Haiti. They called it Saint-Domingue. By the way, in 1791, Haiti was the wealthiest colony in the Caribbean. Okay, the sugar plantations were the wealthiest colony anywhere in the Caribbean. Okay, this was a huge loss for the French. But anyway. People were fleeing, and this convent was dismantled. Samuel Hurlbut bought the bell from a church. Okay, he brought the bell to New London. Okay, he presented the bell to St. James Church. Okay, the bell. They were rebuilding the church. This was the second St. James Church. Their first church had burned down in 1794. They were building the church down here that Ichabod Pease belonged to, and that bell hung in their belfry. Okay, when they sold that church and moved here, that bell was sold to the Baptist church, which was over on a place called Baptist Rocks, over where what's over there, near the phone company, basically, on Union Street. Okay, that bell was then they built a new church, and the bell disappeared. The bell then turned up in a junk shop. Okay, and it was purchased by a guy named William Champion, who lived out on Durfee's Hill in Waterford, and he presented that bell to the First Baptist Church in Waterford, which stands in Jordan Village, right next to where pigs fly, okay? The little restaurant right there, okay? I believe it's still there. I don't know if they know that bell came from the Haitian Revolution. I don't know. I'm calling them, I'm in touch with them, I'm trying to get them to track it down. It's interesting that there are at least two Haitian communities. There's a big Haitian community in Norwich. There's also a Haitian community here in London. There are two churches that provide Haitian services, including the Baptist Church here on State Street and the one next to the courthouse. My guess is, if that bell really is in existence out there, that those people would really like to know about that. Okay, so we'll see. Okay, the fourth revolution was Eli Whitney. Okay, Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin. Cotton gin, by the way, is cotton engine. It's a mechanical machine that separates the seeds from the cotton. Revolutionized the cotton industry. Suddenly, cotton became very labor-intensive, even more labor-intensive, but extremely profitable. Okay, that changed the world. Okay, in 1794, the same year, that's the year that Ichabod Pease was emancipated. Okay, when John Deschamps emancipated him, he also emancipated another slave, Susan Anderson. Her name's going to come up again. Okay, this is her Emancipation Papers. Again, you can go down to City Hall and you can read this. Okay, that's her Emancipation Papers. Sarah Deschamps Wee. You remember Captain John Deschamps. Now this is a story this is all related to Ichabod Pease. I believe she's the one who may have initiated the emancipation of Ichabod Pease. Her name is signed to the initial papers requesting emancipation. In order to get emancipated, you had to request it, and it had to be approved by the Justice of the Peace. So she initiated the process. This was in the spring of 1794. And on June 11th, 1794, Sarah Deshawn's mother passed away. On June 27th, 1794, Ichabod Pease and Susan Anderson were emancipated. Now, I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but I know that John Deshawn had to grant that. And it may have been in response to a request from his daughter, because Sarah, on June 27, 1794, was Sarah Deshawn's birthday. That's the day Ichabod Pease was emancipated. On June 29th, 2 days later, Captain Deshawn died. So they got this in just under the wire. Okay. Rosa Froud Pease is the wife of Ichabod Pease. Okay, I don't have a marriage date for them. I'm not sure when they got married. In 1796, she was emancipated by Captain Robert Froud. She had been a slave in his family for a number of years. In his will, he gave his house and property on Cape Ann Lake to Rosa Froud Pease. Okay? And there it is. This is down, again, in City Hall. You can see the three things. She's only listed as first name, which is what most of the slaves were only known by. Rose the negress. He gives her his house, he releases her from service, and he gives her the goods in his house, the household goods and the thing, and the service. And he said that he did it for her dedicated and devoted service to caring for his wife and him in their declining years. Okay. 1807, we're moving ahead here. This is when the official international slave trade was outlawed. Okay, it was initiated by the British. The Americans joined that in 1808. It was a law, and it outlawed it. But we know for a fact that between 1807 and 1808 and the American Civil War, 1 million Africans were still imported from Africa, mainly to Brazil and in spite of this prohibition, to Brazil and to Cuba. Especially Cuba, during those years, despite that it was outlawed. It was a lot of Portuguese ships, but there were a lot of Americans that were captaining ships, including people from New England. Okay. 1808, Rosa Pease dies. She was only 48 years old. They had no children. Okay. 1818, Connecticut was operating under the Charter. You know the Charter Oak? The famous charter tree. That was a colonial constitution. They needed to update it. So in 1818, they rewrote it. And in that law, they specifically determined that the suffrage was only allowed to white males. Blacks were not allowed to vote. Women were not allowed to vote. Native Americans were not even citizens. Okay? So, oops. Here's another question. Okay. Can anybody name a town or a village in Connecticut, forgetting what you just saw, that is named for its most prominent citizen who happened to be a black man? Glasgow.
Whoa.
I knew this was going to be a tough crowd. Okay. You knew that anyway.
Yeah, interesting man.
Yeah. Yes. Isaac Glasgow. Okay, Isaac Glasgow was a blacksmith. By the way, blacksmiths were extremely valuable citizens. Okay, you couldn't operate a town without a blacksmith. You needed axles for your wheels. You needed tools. You needed plows. You needed farm implements. You needed weapons. You needed harpoons. Okay, he made all of it. Okay, he had he had 7 forges in an area of Griswold, Connecticut, that is now named for him. And of course, supposedly it was an error. They misspelled his name. It should be Glasgow. The postal error spelled it Glasgow. Okay, but he was a very prominent citizen, and he was also very active in civil rights issues. Okay, in 1823, Isaac Glasgow, along with a guy named Pierre Moody, who was another free black, and another group of men, petitioned the Connecticut legislature on the basis of saying, look, we do not have the right to vote, but we have to pay taxes. That's not right. Now, if you rephrase that, you recall that we fought a war over that. Taxation without representation. Okay, that's why we declared, one of the reasons why we declared our independence. Okay, here it is 45 years later. blacks are not allowed to vote, but they're taxed. Okay, he said that's not right. His petition went to the Connecticut legislature, and the petition was denied. Okay, blacks in Connecticut did not get the right to vote until the 15th Amendment around 1869, I think, 1870. Okay, in spite of that. Again, this is stuff that I don't remember being taught this stuff in school. I don't remember hearing about this. Why not? Okay. Freedom's Journal, newspaper that was the first African-American newspaper published in America, owned by African-Americans. Okay, it's a very important paper. You can go online, you can read every single issue, okay, online. And what's happening is the movement is starting to coalesce. Where before abolitionism, which was led by blacks, free blacks in Pennsylvania and Quakers, okay, people think it was all whites. No, it wasn't. It was mostly blacks. Okay, but now we have a voice. We have a forum. We have a place where they can talk about it. They can write about the news. Very important. Founded by a guy named Samuel Cornish and John Russell. John Russell was the first black college graduate from Bowdoin College in Maine. Okay, they started that. Now, what happened was, it started to attract a lot of attention. You're going to see some names here. David Walker. David Walker is one of the most important black Americans that you probably don't know very much about, but you should. Okay, this is how they sold the Freedom's Journal. It was you couldn't go into CVS and buy it. You had to subscribe to it. Okay, David Walker was a subscribing agent. Isaac Glasgow in Norwich was a subscribing agent, so we know he was involved in this stuff. Okay, he's not the only one. David Ruggles, a very well-known man from Norwich. Okay, he moved to New York and he ran a grocery store and ran a couple of other stores. He was very active in the Underground Railroad, very active in civil rights things. He was involved with Frederick Douglass achieving his freedom. He was involved with Joseph L. Smith from Norwich getting to freedom. Okay, he ran a store in New York. And the interesting thing is, it's funny how there's nothing new under the sun. You all are probably familiar with fair trade, buying fair trade goods that are produced by people earning wages. Okay, we think of it as something of a new thing. Read the bottom of that. The sugars above mentioned are free sugars. They are manufactured by free people, not slaves. This was fair trade business in 1828, led by David Ruggles. Okay, it's an amazing story. Isaac Rogers is another man we don't know anything about. There were two Isaac Rogers in New London. He was known as Black Isaac. That's how they distinguished. There was a white Isaac and a black Isaac. He's listed in New London, Connecticut as an authorized agent for the Freedom's Journal. We don't know anything about him. One of my friends on the New London page again sent me a clipping that showed that Isaac Rogers was the wealthiest black man in New London at one time. I never knew that. He ran a tavern. Okay, he ran a tavern and he was a Methodist minister. I don't know how he managed that. I don't know if he was doing that at the same time. I don't know. But again, that's one of the stories that we don't know. We don't know. We need to find out who was this guy. He eventually removes himself to Philadelphia and he kind of disappears. We don't know very much about him. And by the way, we need people to go in and find out these stories. I'm only telling one story. Okay, there are many stories that need to be told. Just to give you an indication of what it was like to live in the North. Okay. In 1829 in Ohio, there were many free blacks moving across the river, the Ohio River. That's where Uncle Tom's Cabin, they crossed the Ohio River into Ohio. Okay, and that fictional story, but it was also a true story. If you were an emancipated slave in the South, or if you bought your freedom, there were laws all over the South that said if you're a free black, you need to. One of the conditions of your freedom is you got to get out of town. You got to get out of Virginia. You got to get out of North Carolina. 30 days, 90 days, something like that, because they didn't want free blacks poisoning the minds of the slaves with ideas of liberty and freedom. Okay, so there was mandatory, a condition of your emancipation was to get out. So they were coming into places like Ohio. Okay, they were not welcome in Ohio. Racism, there was racism all over the place. What they were afraid of, one of the things they were afraid of, was that the blacks would come in and work for cheaper than the white people that were working there. It was going to undermine their system. So they decided that the blacks were a problem. And in order to stay, or in order to discourage them from coming, they required that they put up a $500 bond, okay, ensuring their good behavior, okay? Seriously, okay? And who has $500? Okay, nobody has, not in 1829, nobody has $500. So this could have affected 10,000 people. What they wanted to do, again, this was selectively enforced. What they wanted to do was discourage more blacks from coming there, okay? Well, this didn't sit well anywhere. There were race riots in Cincinnati in 1829, 1836, and 1841. Those race riots were white on black. There were white folks attacking the black citizens, okay? Harriet Beecher Stowe was present at that. I don't know what influence that had on her writing her book. Yes?
There was also an issue of tilting the actual number of blacks in the state. There was a great fear that there were too many.
Right.
It was actually going to turn this state into a real safe haven.
Right. Exactly. And that happened, not, this is maybe one of the most blatant examples, but that same was true in all the states all over the place. In fact, in 1832, we're going to have a story about that. Okay. David Walker. Anybody know about David Walker? Okay, 2 people. Okay, maybe a few more. Okay, I knew nothing of David Walker until I stumbled on a book. Okay, this is called David Walker's Appeal to the Colored Citizens of the World, but in particular and very expressly to those of the United States of America. Okay, this is a seminal book of black liberation, politics, philosophy, and thinking, and we never heard about it. Okay, David Walker was a free man born in Wilmington, North Carolina. His mother was free, so he was free. That's the way it worked. His father was a slave, and he lived among slaves all of his life. He had to get out of there. He moved to a place called Charleston, South Carolina. He was in Charleston, South Carolina in 1822. In 1822, there was a very famous conspiracy called the Denmark-Vesey conspiracy. There's no direct connection between David Walker, but we know he was there. We don't know, he was never prosecuted. He wasn't hung or executed like so many others were. But we know he was there. And he said, I've got to get out of here or I'm dead. So he left and he went to Philadelphia, ended up in Boston. Became a haberdasher in Boston, sold new and used clothing. And he researched, and he studied, and he wrote a book. Okay, the book has a preamble and 4 chapters. And each one of those chapters is dedicated to an aspect of the wretched condition of the slaves in America. The wretchedness as a consequence of slavery, our wretchedness in consequence of ignorance, our wretchedness in the consequence of the preachers of the religion of Jesus Christ, and our wretchedness in the consequence of the colonizing plan. And each one of these is riveting to read. Okay, it's written like a sermon. Okay, and that was the intention of the book. The intention of the book was to put it in the hands of people who were literate and have them read it to people who couldn't read and write. And that's exactly what he did. He smuggled it down to the South. Okay, on ships, by railroad, by boatmen. That's how they distributed it. And suddenly it appeared in Wilmington, North Carolina. It appeared in Savannah, in Charleston, in Richmond, in New Orleans. And it caused a sensation because in it, he says, we will never be free as long as if we don't take matters into our own hands. Okay, he's calling for an insurrection. Okay, to rise up. We can't let the white man do it for us. We need to let them know that we want it. And how do we want it? We demonstrate it. So this was considered subversive. The 2 words that are used to describe this are subversive and incendiary. Okay, it's a brilliant book. You should read it. It should be required reading in my estimation, history classes. This caused a sensation in the South. Okay, there were people were killed for possessing this book. Okay, and they were distributed all over. They couldn't understand how it kept showing up. Okay, David Walker's a very clever guy. He was putting it Boston as a harbor. He was putting it. He would arrange with sailors to smuggle it down there. This resulted in laws in many of the southern ports that said, if you're a black sailor on a boat, you stay on the boat when you come in here, or you stay in jail. We don't want you poisoning the minds of our slaves, our docile slaves, with ideas of freedom. So they enforced those laws. Okay, David Walker was smarter. Okay, he was not only using black sailors, he was using white sailors who could walk anywhere. They would stitch the books into their clothing to smuggle it down, and they would claim that they didn't know what it was. If they were arrested, they said they thought it was a religious tract. Okay, maybe that's true, maybe not. Yes?
Jump ahead 100 years, Chicago Defender, same thing. Sleeping car porters, if you brought a Chicago Defender into a place like Mississippi, Alabama, they would kill you. and people would actually read it in a room with the door closed and a guard at the door. It's amazing how things get repeated. And if you read Walker's book, it fits now.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
It's unbelievable.
Yes, it does. Okay, so David Walker, this is how it reads, by the way. Compare your, he mentions the all men created equal. Compare your language above, extracted from your, this is David Walker talking, your Declaration of Independence with your cruelties and murders inflicted by your cruel and unmerciful fathers and yourselves on our fathers and on us, men who have never given your fathers the least provocation. What did slaves do to deserve slavery? What did they do? Nothing. They were captives. Okay, so the whole book reads like this. It's amazing to read. Okay, Walker became very unpopular down there. Okay, the governor of Georgia put out a $10,000 bounty. You know what $10,000 is? We talked about $500 being a lot of money. This is a fortune. If you bring him in alive, $3,000 if you bring him in dead. Okay, David Walker published that book in 1829. In September, I think, or August of 1830, he was found dead in his doorway. Okay, the reason given, the actual reason given, was that he died of consumption. Okay, his daughter had died of consumption about a couple of months before that. That's possible, but there are still theories that this was not a natural death. Okay, he was a wanted man. Okay. Well, everything that they were afraid of down there, that David Walker's book was going to do, 1831 we have Nat Turner's Rebellion. Nat Turner's Rebellion was the most serious, one of the most serious. It wasn't the most serious, but it resulted in the deaths of 55 to 65 whites and probably 100 to 150 blacks in retaliation. Okay, people, where is Southampton, Virginia? It's right across the border from Wilmington, North Carolina. Isn't that a coincidence? Again, we don't have any direct connection between Nat Turner and David Walker, but we're sure that David Walker was influenced. But David Walker had an influence on this. Okay, this resulted in even more restrictions on literacy. You could be punished for teaching someone to read down there. So the themes are kind of running through this, and this is where we're getting back to Ichabod Pease. Education, abolition, freedom. Okay, those are all connected. Everybody knows that education was the key to raising of the race at that time. That was the way they could get out of rise above slavery. So you could be punished with death for not only for holding, distributing those pamphlets, but for teaching people to read. Here's the legislation in North Carolina. Okay. Second offense, death for circulating seditious pamphlets. Okay, I believe this is from from Freedom's Journal. Okay, and this is David Walker. The bare name of educating the colored people scares our cruel oppressors almost to death. And they were scared to death. Okay. Whoop.
Yeah.
Back up 1 second. Okay. 1831. Okay, you saw it. Okay, 1831. There was a group of abolitionists in Philadelphia who felt that they also recognized that education is the key to this, and they needed teachers. So they wanted to set up what was called a normal school. A normal school was a place where they teach teachers to teach. Okay, and they decided that a good place to do that would be New Haven, Connecticut, because it's a port. Okay, there was a large African American community there, and there was already a college there. Okay, perhaps you've heard of it. It's called Yale. Okay, they're there. So they decided to make a proposal to start a normal school for black educators in New Haven, Connecticut. And you know, they say timing is everything. Okay, when they made that announcement, they made that announcement in September of 1831. And there were newspapers that came out. Newspapers were largely weeklies at that time. And in the same newspaper was the headline talking about the proposal to start a school for Negro teachers. And next to it was a headline announcing Nat Turner's Rebellion. Okay? There's the vote. 700 to 4. It was turned down. Okay? They never started that school. Okay, now this is starting to divide people everywhere, including the Congregational Church in Guilford. In 1832, they split. Okay, we went to a talk down there in Guilford. We walked right by that church that split off. There's a church that split off here in New London. If Eileen was here, I can't remember if it's Congregational or if it's the Baptist church. They split over the slavery issue. Okay, things are getting hot. Okay. 1831-32, that's when William Lloyd Garrison founded the American Anti-Slavery Society. Who knows what that building is? The Prudence Crandall Museum, okay? Prudence Crandall School, 1832. Okay, she starts an academy for young women, okay?
Where was that located?
Canterbury, Connecticut. Canterbury, Connecticut. Okay, and she was very well thought of, and her school was very successful. And she was approached. That's Prudence Crandall. She was approached by Sarah Harris. Okay, Sarah Harris was the daughter of a prominent black man from Norwich, who they actually moved to Canterbury, and she wanted to join the school because she was 20 years old at the time, and she wanted to be able to teach little colored children to read and write. And Prudence Crandall turned her down. But she persisted. She went back, and she asked her again. And Prudence Crandall, in the meantime, had been talking with abolitionists and whatnot, and decided, okay, you can come to my school. Well, this created a furor in Canterbury, because the white parents did not want the black students. They were afraid that it was going to bring a lot of black families to Canterbury, okay? And they didn't want that to happen. So there was a huge stink, and they resisted it. Eventually, they pulled their students out, and they had a lot of issues in the community. They had to close the school down. So Prudence Crandall got together with a group of abolitionists. You might recognize those. Arthur Tappan started a law school, which is now, I believe, Yale Law School. Theodore Wright was the president of Yale. Samuel Cornish founded the Freedom's Journal. Just James Forden, a very well-known guy. James May Beeman from Middletown. William Lloyd Garrison. Okay, they got together and they decided they were going to reopen that school. This time they were going to reopen the school for young ladies and little misses of color, exclusively. So if you thought the Fuhrer was bad when she allowed one young girl in, all heck broke loose. I am in church. The physician who lived across the street refused to serve the girls. Okay, there were 20 girls, approximately 20 that went to school there. The physician across the street refused to serve them. The grocery store wouldn't sell them goods. The Congregational Church across the street wouldn't admit them to services. They poisoned the well. They put horse manure in the well to poison the well. Finally, a mob attacked the building. Okay, they threw bricks through all the windows. These are 20 little girls who were going to school there, and they're abused constantly whenever they go out in public. This went on for a period of time. They passed what was called the Black Law in Connecticut, which said you couldn't start a school for children of color without the approval of the town. Okay, Prudence Crandall was arrested 3 times. Okay, and they ended up dropping the charges, largely because of the testimony of the young ladies. Okay, as a result of this, of course, Prudence Crandall is our state heroine. Okay, what about the 20 girls? Okay, the Prudence Crandall Museum right now. Okay, the final thing was that there was a mob attacked the building. They threw bricks through the windows. They tried to burn the place down. For safety and security reasons, she closed the school. She ended up moving out of state. Prudence Crandall became our state heroine. Okay, the Prudence Crandall Museum these days, it's a wonderful place, by the way. If you get the chance, please go. They do a wonderful exhibit. But they're preparing to close down for some renovations this fall. And they're going to do 2 kinds of renovations. One renovation, they're going to renovate the building. But they're also going to renovate the story that they tell. And they're going to give more, they're going to try to flesh out the real story, which includes the story of those young girls who were heroines also, to hang in there with that. Okay. This is how they closed it. Okay, that's a depiction. Sarah Harris eventually became Sarah Harris Fairweather. Okay, she was the student there. She lived in New London from 1841 to 1855. Did anybody know that? I didn't know that. Okay?
I knew that. No, I'm just kidding.
You're scaring me. I think I'm going to lose my bet. So they lived here for 13, 14 years. Okay? Nobody knows it. Okay? That's what she looked like in her Middle Ages. That's where they lived. That's a map of 1850 New London. This right here, you can see the name George Fairweather. Okay? That's on the map from 1850. Right here is where the wine merchant is. This is where the courthouse is. All right? It's right there. That's where they lived. George Fairweather was a 2nd-generation blacksmith. Again, a very valuable guy. Okay, he set up a blacksmith shop here. When they left, while they were here, they were active in the Underground Railroad, they were active in the abolition movement. George Fairweather was a representative to the Colored Men's Council in 1849, a civil rights group in 1849. We know nothing about him. Why don't we recognize Sarah Harris? Okay. They moved to Rhode Island, which is where Fairweather was from. Fairweather, by the way, was half Narragansett and half black. Okay, his father was a blacksmith, and some of his sons were blacksmiths. Okay, they moved back to Kingston, Rhode Island, which is their homestead. There is a museum, a Fairweather museum dedicated to them in South Kingston, Rhode Island. Not only that, that's the location of the University of Rhode Island. There is a building on the University of Rhode Island campus named Sarah Harris Fairweather. She lived as long in New London as she lived there. Why haven't we recognized her? How come we don't know the story? I'll leave that as an open question. Okay, there are other people that are well known there. Remember Isaac Glasgow? That's one of his daughters. That's another of his daughters. They attended Prudence Crandall School. Okay, we don't know anything about them. Okay, his name comes up again. There's Connecticut's Black Law. And by the way, this wasn't the only school that had an experience like this. This is Noyes Academy in Noyes, New Hampshire. They started a school that was open to black and white students. The townspeople reacted much the same way that Canterbury did. Only they were a little more dramatic. Okay, what you see is 95 yoke of oxen. Okay, they lifted that school off its foundation, and they dragged it to a swamp, and they burned it. Okay, and then they built a school for whites on the site. Okay, that's in Noyes, New Hampshire. There were some well-known people there. Okay, when they left. Okay, that's what they did. When they left, they went to Alton, Illinois. That's going to come up again. Okay, some of the students that were there were Henry Highland Garnet. He became a leading civil rights spokesman in the mid-1800s. Okay, he married Julia Williams. Okay, guess what? Julia Williams was one of Prudence Crandall's students. Okay, and a lot of them ended up in Alton, Illinois. That'll figure in the story later. The Charleston Mail pamphlet. Well, William Lloyd Garrison knew about David Walker's adventure with smuggling the books in. So he decided to send some pamphlets to Charleston, South Carolina. He got the names of every resident of South Carolina, of Charleston, and he addressed abolitionist pamphlets to everyone, okay? And they landed up in the post office. Now, possession of those, you saw it earlier, is a crime punishable by death. If you pick up that mail, okay, this created a huge stink in Charleston, South Carolina, infuriated the state of South Carolina. Okay, they refused to deliver the mail. They contacted the postmaster in New York. He told them, hold the mail. He contacted the President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. Okay, Andrew Jackson's response was to say, hold the mail, only give it to the mail to those people who come in and tell you that they are subscribers, and then publish their names as advocating slave insurrection. Okay, that was his solution. Okay, they never did that because there was a group of men who took matters in their own hands in Charleston. They were called the Lynch Men. Okay, they attacked the Charleston post office, broke into the window, pulled out the mail sacks, and they burned them in the streets. Okay, the government of there it says, inciting insurrection, punished with death. Okay, again, a flurry of laws. And in South Carolina, they adopted resolutions against the incendiary literature of North abolitionists, and they mailed copies to every city and town in the United States, particularly in the North, okay, to say, do something about these abolitionists. They are going to create a slave insurrection. And why would the people in the North care about that? Well, the cotton industry was the driver of the economy, okay? But they just picked the cotton. Where did they make it into cloth? Textile mills. Where were the textile mills? Lawrence, Mass., Lowell, Mass., Norwich, Connecticut, New London, Connecticut. Where did they build the cotton gins? Okay, they built them in the North. Two of the largest cotton gin companies in the world were located within a half a mile of here. Okay, one was Alderson Douglas, which was right down here. The second one was Brown Cotton Gin Company, which is down where they built submarines on Pequot Avenue. Okay, the largest in the world were in New London. Okay, how do they ship the cotton? They ship it on the railroads. Where do they build the railroads? Okay, who builds the railroads? They ship it on boats. Who builds the boats? Okay, in the North. When you're a farmer, you get paid when the crops come in, right? What do you do for the 11 other months? Okay, you borrow money. Who do you borrow money for? New York, okay? By the way, when the South seceded from the Union in 1860, the mayor of New York came out, Fernando Wood, came out and said, New York should secede with the South. That's how tied in New York was with the cotton industry. Okay, so they knew, if they send a letter to the North is going to have to respond because this is their bread and butter. As a result of this, there was a riot in Boston, point, there was a British abolitionist was coming to town, and a mob formed, and they tried to track him down. They couldn't find him. They found William Lloyd Garrison instead. And that's what they did to him. They put a rope around his neck, and they dragged him around Boston. Finally, he was arrested by the sheriff for his own safety and held in jail because they probably would have lynched him. Okay? Boston wasn't the only place that happened. There were anti-abolitionist meetings in New Haven, Hartford, Norwich, and right here in New London. Here's the announcement of the public meeting in New London. Okay? If you look through that list of names, you're going to recognize some names from New London there. Okay? By the way, the pro-slavery crowd in New London far outweighed the abolitionist movement. The abolitionists in New London were a distinct minority. Okay? It was dominated by the pro-slavery people. And there's a list of some of their names. There's the text of that. And it refers to wanting to stay in good standing with our southern brethren. Okay? And desirous to cultivate the most friendly and honorable discourse with them. And to disclaim any interference with their constitutionality, and to say that the city is decidedly hostile to the movements of the abolition faction. Okay, and they held a meeting. They held meetings like this in Hartford, New Haven, Norwich, and New London. Okay, here's the Hartford one. That's the Hartford announcement. At the same time in the Congress, this was so upsetting, they instituted what's called the gag rule. That meant that they would not consider any proposal that mentioned slavery or mentioned abolition. They would set it down on the desk, and they would take no action on it. It was called the gag rule. Pinckney was from South Carolina, I believe. So the Connecticut legislature, as a result of this, passed a resolution in showing their sympathy with the slave states against these incendiaries. There it is right there. Okay. Not only that, towns passed resolutions like this that said, it's our duty to separate ourselves from the abolitionists, and we do entirely deny the use of the town hall or any building for any abolitionist purpose. Okay. Now, New London was a microcosm of this whole struggle. Everything that happened all over the country happened in New London here. We don't hear about it very much. Okay. You remember we said at the beginning, New London was vexed by what to do. Now, you've got people in town that are on opposite sides. They're polarized, much like they are today. Okay. Over the slavery question, over the abolition question. And that filters down to kids. You've got incidents in schools, you've got bullying in schools, you've got so it's a problem. They don't know what to do. Ichabod Pease learned of the problem. Okay? He went before the New London School Society, that's what they called it back then, with an offer that he would run a school for black children from his home. This was in 1837. His first offer was rejected by the New London school community. Okay? So he went back, he persisted. He went back a second time. This time they agreed to do it. They agreed to pay him $50 a year, okay, to run a school for black children from his home. One of the mortgages that he signed on that property is October 26th, 1837. That's his signature again. 10 days later, an abolitionist publisher in Alton, Illinois, was murdered by a pro-slavery mob. They attacked his printing shop and destroyed his press, threw his press in the river, and they shot him. Okay, that's him. Alton, Illinois. Remember I said the people from the Noise School went to Alton, Illinois? That's where they were. Okay. November 7th. Abraham Lincoln, an Illinois politician at the time of Lovejoy, called his tragic death the single most important event that ever happened in the New World. Okay. So people were upset about this. Abraham Lincoln is upset about this. He wasn't the only guy that was upset about this. You might recognize this guy. Anybody know who this guy is?
John Brown.
John Brown. Okay. That's the flag of the League of the Gileadites next to him. John Brown, November 1837, as a result of the death of the murder of Lovejoy, he stands in a church in Ohio and publicly dedicates his life to here before God in the presence of these witnesses from this time. I dedicate my life to the destruction of slavery. And we know what he did. He was working on that plan already, okay, for Harper's Ferry. He worked on that plan for 20 years. He studied the Haitian Revolution, by the way. He studied Spartacus. People think that he went off half-cocked. He did not. This was a plan that went on for years. Okay. By the way, that flag that you saw, the League of the Gileadites, that was a group that he formed in Springfield, Massachusetts, okay, around 1850. Okay. They believed in armed resistance to the Fugitive Slave Law. Okay. And there was an agreement signed by about 48 guys, I think, and John Brown was one of them. He was one of the leaders. And from that day forward, okay, no fugitive slave was ever taken from Springfield, Massachusetts, because Those guys were armed. They would go down to the train station. If a bounty hunter came in, they would step up to him and say, "You're not coming into this town." And they'd show their guns. And they knew that they better not, and so they left. Okay. Not a lot of people know that about Springfield. Okay. This was an ultimatum, is a newspaper published in New London. Okay, you can read it online. And this was their reaction to the Lovejoy killing. Okay, that wasn't the only incident that they had here. Okay. In July of 1838, I'm going to go back to that in a second. July of 1838, the abolitionists wanted to have a celebration of the Declaration of Independence. Okay, so we do that all the time, right? The prominent citizens in the city suspected that they were going to use this opportunity to spread their abolitionist literature. And so they made sure that the abolitionists by name, some of them, Bowles, Hempstead's, Civilian Haley, and there were others. I don't have all the names. Those are the most prominent ones that I know. Okay, so they were denied the use of town hall. They were denied the use of the customs house. They were denied the use of all the churches. Okay, except for one. They finally got to do it in the Methodist Church. And what they were going to do that day, they were indeed going to read some abolitionist literature. Okay, they were going to read the Declaration of Independence, where it says all men are created equal. That would be considered abolitionist, seditious literature in South Carolina. Okay? When I read this, and I thought, wow, that happened in New London. They refused to let them read the Declaration of Independence. To me, that was amazing. Okay? That's what they were going to read. Okay. Now, on a personal note, I went to school in Washington, D.C. Okay. Georgetown University, which is my school, in 1838 was in financial trouble. They weren't sure how to get out of it, so they decided that they sold some property. They could become financially viable again. So they sold some property. They sold 272 slaves down the river to New Orleans. Okay, being sold to New Orleans, by the way, was as Mary said, the sugar plantations. That was a death sentence. Average lifespan was 5 to 7 years in New Orleans as a result of that. I am pleased to say that in the last couple of years, Georgetown has taken some steps. They've set up a reconciliation center. They set up some scholarships. They are working with the people in New Orleans to find a way to kind of rectify this. There are a few more institutions around here that should do that, like Harvard. Okay, 1839. We're now in 1839. You recognize this. This is the homicide. With all due respect to Steven Spielberg, okay, the homicide came into New London, not New Haven. Okay, it remained in New London the entire time. The captives were taken to New Haven and to Farmington, but the ship remained in New London. Okay. And there it is being announced in the newspaper coming in. You can see it down at the bottom. Okay, that's Joseph Cinque. He was the leader. I mentioned Civilian Haley. Civilian Haley put his money where his mouth is. In 1842, no one would sell houses to blacks. Civilian Haley decided that wasn't right. He built 5 houses over on Hempstead Street. Okay, and he sold them at cost to free blacks, and it became the nucleus of the first African-American neighborhood in New London. Okay, it still remains a mixed neighborhood, but it's still the heart, one of the central African-American neighborhoods. Shiloh Baptist Church is in its backyard. Okay. The interesting thing about that, this is what it looked like in 1905. Those are the houses. Those are the Haley houses. Okay, I was doing some research on the Green Book. In New London, the Green Book sites. Well, it turns out that 73 Hempstead was listed as a tourist home in the Green Book for 10 years in the 1930s and 40s, okay? And the Hempstead house is one of Civilian Haley's houses, and that's just an interesting connection that there's 100 years and it's still in the struggle. Okay, so who was Ichabod Pease? Okay, we know that New London was vexed by what to do in the school system. New London creates a segregated school system. Who knew that New London had a segregated school system? Officially. They had several schools for white students, probably 7 or 8, and they had one school for black students. And the one school for black students was Ichabod Pease, okay, at 81 years old. Okay. Frederick Douglass said that knowledge, again, the importance of education. Frederick Douglass recognized the importance of education. Just to put it in perspective, Frederick Douglass escaped from slavery on September 3rd, yesterday, 1838, okay? By that time, Ichabod Pease was in the second year of running his school. Okay? This was going on before anybody knew who Frederick Douglass was. Okay? And we all know who Frederick Douglass was. How many of us know who Ichabod Pease was? The Ichabod Pease story is the story of slavery, emancipation, the struggle for equality and education in antebellum America. And he tells it right here in New London, Connecticut. Okay? Ichabod Pease rose from a condition of abject slavery, gained an education, his emancipation, became a teacher and a leader in his community who was highly esteemed by people of all races. In the face of racist opposition, in the midst of a raging national controversy, and in spite of his advanced age, Ichabod Pease stepped up. He stepped forward in strength and with dignity and determination to provide for the education of black children in New London. This is the stuff of heroes. He deserves to be commemorated among those who have contributed to the cause of popular education in this town. Benjamin Stark said that. Benjamin Stark wrote the historical sketch of New London. Who was Benjamin Stark? Benjamin Stark was a white supremacist, okay? Yet even he recognized that Ichabod Pease deserves some commemoration. Ichabod Pease died in his sleep on March 3rd, 1842. He had no heirs. He left his property on Church Street to Susan Anderson. Remember Susan Anderson? She was emancipated the same day he was. Okay, the idea of community. He is sharing what he has with another person. Here is Susan Anderson's signature. Now, if you look at her signature, her name is written. This right here says, her mark. That's her ex. She was illiterate. Okay, she could not read or write. There is her Emancipation Papers at the top of that. Okay, so here we have Ichabod's signature. We have a discourse. We have his gravestone with his name spelled wrong. Okay? This is what his gravestone looks like today. This is why we need you today, to help us restore that. Okay? And is this the best we can do to the honor and the memory of Ichabod Pease and his contribution? Okay? On September 10th, 6 days from today, it will be Ichabod Pease's 264th birthday. I think it's time to give him his due. Thank you, Mr. Ichabod Pease, and happy birthday. And thank you. This is the complete world of Ichabod Pease. This is where, it doesn't have Fisher's Island, okay? When he came here, he lived with Robinson Mumford. He was then a slave of Captain John Deshawn. Here's the St. James I, St. James II, St. James III, where we are tonight. He worked for Captain Jedediah Huntington. That's up where the Fiddleheads is, and this is where his school was. Oh, and up in the top, that's where the property was that his wife inherited. It's up on Jefferson Avenue, okay? Kind of way out of town. But that would make a wonderful Ichabod Pease tour, don't you think? Do we have time? Anybody have any questions? Or
I just have one. How old was he when he was emancipated?
39.
39,
Thank you.
which was 6 years under the, he had to be under 45.
In fairness, before we take a lot of questions, I want to ask, we thought we were going to be out about 8 o'clock, so I want to ask if it's okay to, okay.
All right, does anybody have any questions? I need to drink of water.
Where's your one?
Okay. Oh, by the way, I left something out. I meant to include this. When we talked about slavery in New London, I meant to include this. There's a 1790 census that shows a listing of the slave owners in New London, Connecticut at that time. Okay? It's 6 pages long. Okay? Most of those slave owners were one slave. Some of them were 2. One guy had as many as 7 at that time. That was in 1790. So it was fairly widespread in New London. That's a lot of people. This is New London County, by the way. Okay. All right, anybody have any questions? Yes, the black t-shirt.
Any idea how many children were in this school?
This is one of the problems that we're working on now. Again, this is the beginning. We don't have a whole lot of... Oh, you know that?
I don't know it yet, but what I do have is the
This is Mary's assignment.
The 1830 and 1840 censuses have identified black children by age groups, and by extrapolating, I can figure out about how many kids were between ages, say, 5 and 12 in 1837. It'll take me a while. That's why I said this was the preview.
And that's Mary's strength. She loves to do this kind of research, so we're very fortunate to have that. What was I going to say? I made some inquiries to the New London School Board on exactly that question, if they have any records from the schools in that day. And the lady said, well, we have records that go back to 1930. I said, I need 1830. She said, well, I'm going to have to look into that. So I don't know. I understand that there may be some of those records, maybe Sally knows, down at the New London County Historical Society. They may have school records, but I don't know.
I have not seen them.
Okay. That was my next line of inquiry, to go to the Historical Society and see what kind of records they have. They have, I believe that's where they have the historical sketch done by Benjamin Stark.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what else they have. You never know. They may have some other stuff there. But we really don't know how many students there were. We don't know their names. We don't know their families. We don't know anything about them. That's your job. From here on out. Help us. Yes.
Yeah, the grave sites, are they in the large cemetery, the Cedar?
Okay. When Ichabod Pease and his wife died, they were using what's called the second burial ground. First burial ground is over here near Buckley School, near the Magnet School. That's the first one. The second one is now a park, Williams Park, up at the corner of Williams and Hempstead. That would be where Ichabod and his wife were buried. And the third burial ground is the site of Benny Dover Jackson School now. They moved all of those graves to create that park. All of those graves were moved up to Cedar Grove Cemetery. So that's where they are now. There's a section up there of the second and third burial ground transferred bodies, whatever it was they transferred at the time, okay, that's up behind the office building. And that's where these photographs were taken. By the way, the photograph that you can read was from Find a Grave website. It was probably taken years ago, and that's why you can read it. The later site is what I took that photograph a couple of months ago, and you can't read it. Okay. Wait. Okay. Good.
So you've inferred, but do we know what happened to the school? Like when he died, did the school close?
What happened, the way it's written, according to Benjamin Stark, we know he was paid for 2 years, and then there's no record of payment. Of course, we can't verify that right now with the records that we have. But it appears that at that point that the black students may have, things were changing, and they may have gone into the school system. Okay, we don't know that for sure. That's a question that we're going to try to answer.
Way in the back. She's got her hand up.
Okay, in the back.
Do you know who the slaves were before they were brought to the shores of America?
I'm sorry?
Do you know who the slaves were before they were brought to the shores of America?
We know that Venture Smith was named Brotier, and his father was a king, and he witnessed his father's death. With Ichabod Pease, that story, the only story we have is that he was born at Fisher's Island. I don't know. That's work that still needs to be done. Very difficult work. Yes.
What I'm asking is that most of the slaves that were brought here to America were actually taken from the slave coast, which was also the Hebrews. They were Hebrew people. They were Israelites.
Some were.
Some were Israelites that had fled from Jerusalem down to the western part of Africa. My great-grandfather was brought to Virginia on a ship, and he married a Cherokee woman. But when I did my DNA, my genealogy went back to the slave coast of Nigeria and Benin, which showed that there were a kingdom there. All of those places were kingdoms.
Yes.
And so the slaves that were brought here were educated people, and they had education. There was a place called Timbuktu, and they were educated people. They were blacksmiths, they were agricultural people, they were pastoral people. They were not just people that were just brought here that was just picked up off the dirt.
You are absolutely correct on that. Part of the myth of the history of American slavery is that we took ignorant savages and and brought them to Christianity. Okay, that's far from the truth. Okay, Timbuktu. I'm glad you mentioned Timbuktu. In 1500, the largest library in the world was in Timbuktu. Okay, there were 25,000 students in Timbuktu. It was a city. What's that?
Very civilized city.
It was a city of 250,000 people. Okay, now Timbuktu is kind of a throwaway thing. People say you're from Timbuktu. It sounds like it's in the middle of nowhere. It was in the heart of Africa, but it was the most scholarly city, certainly in Africa. Probably more scholarly than Paris at the time. Okay, but people don't know that. That's part of the myth that we need to know. Also, the wealthiest man in the history of the world was an African man. What's his name? It begins with an M. Begins with an M. He literally paved the streets of his city with gold. He would throw gold. Kevin Booker talked about him recently. But we don't know that. We're not taught that. We were taught the opposite. We were taught that we were doing them a favor. I actually was my wife and I were at a museum in Winchester, Virginia. And the docent there was talking to us about the benefits of slavery and what a huge improvement it was for the slaves that they brought. And I thought, I can't believe you're saying that. In this day and age, I can't believe. I should have known, okay, it was the Stonewall Jackson Museum. Civil War Museum.
Texas, which is the largest book buyer for student books.
Yes.
Several years ago had in their textbook, Africans were brought to the Americas as slaves seeking a better life.
Right. I think it referred to them as migrant workers who paid for their passage by laboring. And
they actual publishing had been recalled.
And there's a reason that happens. How do books like that get published? This was in 2015 that happened. There's a reason. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. The state of Texas buys its books for the entire state as one customer. Okay, so if you're writing a textbook and you want to sell them in Texas, you got to cater to what Texas wants. Okay, otherwise you don't sell your books. Okay, very clever. That's why things like that get bought up. People put stuff in, and they did. A mother raised a stink, and they think they forced them to change it. But that's hard to believe that should happen. No, it's not hard to believe.
No,
it happened in 2000. No, it's not hard to believe.
No.
Okay.
No.
Yes, Jim.
All right, what will be done to the grave, to Pease's grave? How can you restore like an old stone like that? Are you going to do something
it's
like
not cheap.
what happened with Samuel Huntington's grave in Norwich, where they, they made it all new and it doesn't?
All right. No. We have looked, we got an estimate from Beyond the Gravestone, and they've done a lot of work with historic grave sites. They've done a lot of work in Cedar Grove Cemetery. They came out and assessed the gravestone, and what they saw was that there's some friable material that they're going to have to, they're going to almost cement it back into place with a colored mortar to match. They're going to clean the lichen off, which is meticulous work. There are some cracks along the top, and they're going to seal that off so that it doesn't get any worse. And all of this costs about $950. They did give us a big break on the price because they wanted to be part of this project. And I will say that before tonight, we had raised online $485 of that $950. So with all of you here, I think we probably met our goal. So thank you.
It's in Cedar Grove Cemetery.
Oh, it's in Cedar Grove.
It's behind the office. If you look at the map of the Cedar Grove Cemetery, you can get a map. There's a map online. It's in the section that's marked second and third burial ground area. Okay. I can show you where it is. Okay, if you want. Okay, I just want to say one more thing. I should have said it earlier. I want to say what an honor and a privilege it is to be able to give this presentation tonight in New London. Okay, to tell a story of unknown history in New London, in the church where Ichabod Pease was a member, and within 150 yards of where he taught his school. That's amazing. Yeah. To me, that's amazing. And to have it all done as a benefit to restore his gravestone, it doesn't get any better than this for people who love history. Okay. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Roger. Thank you. Yes, sir.
2 questions.
before and after. So if you want to see the gravestone today, as it is, you need to go today and get a picture of it. How long will it take for the after?
I don't have the answer to that, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. What do you think, 6 months, a year, 3 months? Any sort of guesstimate?
I didn't get back to them. I didn't ask them of that because they're going to have to time that with when they do other work in Cedar Grove Cemetery, and that's part of what is reducing the cost for us.
So you can get the before probably within the next 6 months, and then worry about the after.
I would go, if you want to go and see it, I would go sooner rather than later.
What I don't know too is what the temperature needs to be.
Right.
So I
Could be
don't know if
weather.
they're going to do it before it starts really getting cold or not. But you know what I'll do? I will contact them, and I will put that on our social media page. So check our Facebook site, and I can also do an email blast. Any of you who want to sign up to get our emails, we have a sign-up sheet in the back.
By the way, did we introduce Laura Nato? She's the executive director of New London Landmarks. That's who's putting this all together.
The second question was, all of the information that you made available to us, again, very nicely done, thank you. Is that available?
Well, we've got to go.
You gave us all assignments to go and check some of the stuff out.
Yes.
We've got to be able to go and check it out.
Yes.
We
Okay.
have one more person to thank, which is Bob Stuller, who's been videotaping this.
Right here, down front. There is going to be a video of it, so we will work on a way to make it available. Yes. Okay. If you want to take, I can give you my email. Okay, and I can share some of this information with you at some point. I'm still, the file is too huge for me to send it. Okay, I'm not sure how I'm going to get it to Bob.
Thumb drive.
Okay, all right. Well, we can probably do that. But yes, I do want to disseminate this. I do want more people to know about it. I want more people to talk about it. Okay, and if you want to be helpful to that, I would welcome it. Okay. Yes.
On one level, I hate to ask this because it's been such a wonderful presentation. Do you have any evidence that the bodies got moved with the gravestones?
Well, they moved the body. He died in 1842. I'm not sure when the bodies were moved. I want to say it was in 18. Do you know when they moved? They actually moved.
No, what about that? About 1860?
Well, Cedar Grove was opened in 1851. So at some point after 1851, they moved the bodies. I did hear that when they were that they moved what they could find, and when they were building. The predecessor of Benny Dover Jackson High School was New London High School. It was New London High School when I was there. Okay. When they were building the New London High School in 1952, they uncovered some human evidence, some bones. Yeah. So
Also part of the coffins they found in the parking lot of Benny Dover's.
So we don't know how complete a job that they did. We know that they moved the stones. Whether there was anything left of the bodies by that time, or whether they got everything that was left, I leave that to other people. I don't know the answer to that. All right, any other questions? Yes, Nicole.
I don't have a question, but I would really like to say that number one, you did a great job, you and Mary both, and thank you guys for having this. And we just want to say we're really grateful for the information that you've put out here so that I don't know how many children came tonight, but I think it was really, really important for my girls and myself to be here to understand just how far this world has come and how much further with, the help of people sitting here tonight it can go. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Nicole, I want to thank you, not only for your friendship, for bringing your children here tonight.
Yes.
Because teach the children. Teach the children. That's what this is all about. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you.